The silence of the train platform settled heavily around Wilhelmina Dawson as she stood alone with her trunk, abandoned in the shadow of the afternoon sun. The letter of rejection clutched in her trembling hand told her all she needed to know. Her intended husband had taken one look at her and deemed her unworthy, too plain, too outspoken, not at all what he'd envisioned when he sent for a bride from Boston to the dusty town of Copper Creek, Arizona Territory, 1883. The station master had already returned to his post, offering nothing more than a sympathetic glance and a mumbled "happened sometimes, miss." Wilhelmina, or Willa as she preferred, swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. 23 years old, nearly 2,000 miles from home, with $12 to her name and nowhere to go. The sun beat down mercilessly, a stark contrast to the cool New England springs she'd left behind. What now? She whispered to herself, adjusting her bonnet to shield her eyes from the relentless sun. Her navy traveling dress, once crisp and proper, now hung limp with dust and wrinkles from the 3-day journey. The small depot of Copper Creek offered no answers, only the distant sounds of a town that had already rejected her. The clatter of boots on the wooden platform made Willa stiffen her spine, squaring her shoulders. She'd not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her cry, not even as her future crumbled around her. "Madam, you waiting on someone?" The voice was deep, with a slight drawl that marked him as local. Willa turned to face a tall man in dusty range clothes, a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, denim trousers tucked into scuffed boots. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jawline darkened with stubble and eyes the color of the sky after a storm. "No," she answered, her voice steadier than she felt. "It appears I've been left behind." The man stepped closer, and she noted the sun-weathered lines around his eyes, the way his gaze assessed her with curiosity rather than judgment. He couldn't have been more than 30, yet there was something in his bearing that spoke of experience beyond his years. "You the mail-order bride for James Walton?" he asked, his tone neutral. Willa felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was. It seems Mr. Walton found me lacking upon inspection." She gestured to the crumpled letter. "He's arranged passage back east on tomorrow's train, though I'm not entirely certain I wish to return to a family who made it clear they couldn't support another mouth to feed." The man removed his hat, revealing hair the color of burnished copper, cut short but unruly. "Name's Lucas Reid. I run the Double R Ranch about 5 miles out of town." He glanced at her trunk, then back at her face. "If you don't mind my asking, what did Walton find so objectionable? You seem perfectly fine to me." Willa let out a small, bitter laugh. "According to his letter, I'm too educated for a proper wife and argumentative in manner. Apparently, questioning the wisdom of making me wait at the station for 3 hours was evidence of an unsuitable temperament." Lucas's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Walton's a fool," he said simply. Then, after a moment's consideration, he gestured to her trunk. "Miss Wilhelmina Dawson. Willa, if you please. Miss Dawson, I've got a wagon outside. I could take you to the boarding house in town if you're of a mind to stay the night before deciding what to do next." Willa hesitated. The sensible thing would be to accept his offer, find lodging for the night, and reconsider her options. But sensibility had gotten her nowhere. It certainly hadn't prevented her family from arranging her marriage to a stranger, nor had it prepared her for rejection upon arrival. Before she could respond, the station master emerged from the depot, calling out, "Train from Tuckson's arriving early tomorrow, Miss Dawson. 9 o'clock sharp. Mr. Walton's already paid for your return ticket." His gaze shifted uneasily between her and Lucas. Something inside Willa hardened. She traveled across a continent to start a new life, had endured cramped conditions and poor food, had left behind everything familiar only to be dismissed without so much as a conversation. "Thank you, Mr. Reid," she said, decision made. "I would appreciate a ride to the boarding house." Lucas nodded, then bent to grip the handle of her trunk. As he lifted it, he glanced toward the station master. "John, if anyone comes asking, my wife will be staying at the Double R from now on." Willa's breath caught. "I beg your pardon." Lucas met her startled gaze, his expression unreadable. "Just giving you options, Miss Dawson. You can still take that train tomorrow if you want, or you could consider a different arrangement." He lowered his voice. "I need a housekeeper. You need a place to stay. We can discuss terms on the ride to town." The station master cleared his throat. "You taking her as your wife, Reid?" Lucas didn't break eye contact with Willa. "If she's willing." Willa felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "Mr. Reid, we've only just met. And you just spent weeks traveling to marry a man you'd never met," he pointed out reasonably. "At least with me, you know what you're getting from the start: hard work and honest treatment. No surprises." It was madness, complete madness to even consider such an offer from a stranger. And yet, what were her alternatives? Return to Boston in shame? Try to make her way alone in a territory that was still largely untamed? What would this arrangement entail exactly? She asked, ignoring the station master's widening eyes. Lucas set the trunk down. "My ranch needs tending. I need meals cooked, clothes mended, a household managed. In exchange, you'd have a roof over your head, food on your plate, and my protection." He paused. "As for anything else, that would be entirely up to you. I'm not looking to force anything on anyone." Willa studied him, searching for deceit or menace in those storm blue eyes and finding only straightforward pragmatism. He wasn't promising romance or even affection, just survival, with her dignity intact. "And if I wish to leave later?" she asked carefully. "Then I'll take you to the station myself." He offered a small, crooked smile. "Though I hope you'd give the Double R a fair chance before deciding." The depot fell quiet, the only sound the distant whistle of a departing freight train. Willa thought of her family in Boston, of the cramped apartment above her father's tailoring shop, of her mother's constant fretting over money and her brother's resentment at having to share their meager portions with her. She thought of James Walton's dismissive letter, not even bothering to reject her to her face. Then she looked at Lucas Reid, a man offering a bargain rather than empty promises. "Very well, Mr. Reid," she said finally. "I accept your offer of employment. As for the other matter, I believe we should maintain propriety and mutual understanding before making such declarations." Lucas's smile widened slightly, a glint of respect in his eyes. "Fair enough." He hefted her trunk again and nodded to the station master. "John, might be best if word gets around that Miss Dawson has found suitable arrangements. Don't want Walton thinking he can change his mind." The station master nodded slowly. "Sure thing, Reid. I'll tell folks your wife's arrived safe and sound." Lucas led the way off the platform, trunk balanced easily on one shoulder, while Willa followed, her mind racing with the enormity of what she'd just agreed to. As they approached a sturdy wagon hitched to two bay horses, she wondered if she was making another mistake, jumping from one uncertain future to another. Lucas stowed her trunk in the back of the wagon, then offered his hand to help her onto the high seat. His palm was calloused but warm, his grip firm without being crushing. "You still have time to change your mind," he said quietly as she settled her skirts. "That train leaves tomorrow." Willa looked out at the dusty main street of Copper Creek, at the buildings that seemed to crouch against the vast expanse of sky and distant mountains. This wasn't what she'd expected, but perhaps that was for the best. Her expectations had led her here, abandoned at a remote train depot. "No," she said with newfound determination. "I came west to build a new life. I intend to do just that, though perhaps not in the manner I originally anticipated." Lucas climbed up beside her and took the reins. "The double R isn't fancy, but it's solid. Been working it for 8 years now." He clicked to the horses and the wagon lurched forward. "Got about 100 head of cattle, some horses, chickens. The house needs work, but it's sound." As they rolled through town, Willa felt curious eyes on them. Copper Creek wasn't large a general store, saloon, small church, bank, and assorted businesses lining the main street, with houses scattered behind. Women paused in their shopping to watch them pass, and men tipped their hats to Lucas with questioning glances at his companion. "They'll talk," Lucas said matter-of-factly. "Small town, not much else to do." "Let them," Willa replied, chin lifting slightly. "I'd rather be the subject of gossip than an object of pity." Lucas gave her an appraising look. "Walton really was a fool," he murmured, almost to himself. They passed through town and continued along a rutted dirt road that wound through scrubby terrain dotted with cacti and occasional stands of mesquite. The landscape was utterly foreign to Willa, all open space and distant horizons, so different from Boston's crowded streets and tall buildings. "It's beautiful," she said softly, in a wild sort of way. Lucas nodded. "Takes some getting used to. The land out here doesn't forgive mistakes easily, but it rewards those who respect it." He guided the horses around a bend, and a cluster of buildings came into view in the distance. "That's the double R." As they drew closer, Willa could make out a modest but sturdy-looking house built of squared logs and stone, a large barn, corral, and several outbuildings. It wasn't the grand ranch she might have imagined, but neither was it the crude shack she had feared. "You live here alone?" she asked, suddenly wondering what kind of household she'd be managing. "Just me and Pedro Mendoza. He helps with the ranch work and sleeps in the bunkhouse." Lucas slowed the horses as they approached. "Had more hands before, but times got hard after the drought 2 years back. Had to let most go. Building back up now." The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, and Lucas set the brake before jumping down. As he came around to help her descend, a wiry Mexican man emerged from the barn, curiosity evident on his weathered face. "Pedro," Lucas called, "come meet Miss Dawson. She'll be staying with us." Pedro approached, wiping his hands on a rag. He was perhaps 50, with graying hair and intelligent dark eyes that assessed Willa carefully before he offered a respectful nod. "Welcome to Double R, Señorita." "Thank you," Willa replied, extending her hand in greeting. Pedro seemed momentarily surprised by the gesture, but shook her hand with a small smile. "Pedro's been with the ranch since before I bought it," Lucas explained as he retrieved her trunk. "Knows more about cattle than any man I've met." "The boss exaggerates," Pedro said with a modest shrug, though his expression suggested he appreciated the compliment. "I will finish with the new calf, then bring water for the señorita." As Pedro returned to the barn, Lucas carried Willa's trunk up to the house's covered porch. He paused at the door, seeming almost hesitant for the first time. "It's not what you might be used to," he warned. "Been a while since a woman's touch was in this house." Willa straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Reid, I grew up in a 3-room apartment with 6 family members. I'm quite accustomed to making do with what's available." He studied her for a moment, then nodded and pushed open the door. The interior was simple but more comfortable than Willa had expected. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with a stone fireplace at one end, a solid table with chairs at the other, and a few pieces of serviceable furniture between. The floors were wooden planks, swept clean but unvarnished, and a braided rug provided the only softness underfoot. "Kitchen's through there," Lucas said, gesturing to a doorway. "2 bedrooms down that hall. Mine's the one at the end. Other one's been used for storage, but it has a bed. You can have that one." Willa stepped further into the house, noting the sparse decorations, a pair of antlers mounted above the fireplace, a bookshelf with perhaps 24 volumes, a clock ticking steadily on the mantel. It was a bachelor's home, functional rather than comfortable, but she could see its potential. "It's more than adequate," she said honestly. "Though I admit I'm curious why you've decided to take in a stranger when you've managed on your own all this time." Lucas set her trunk down and removed his hat again, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that suggested discomfort with personal questions. "Been meaning to hire help for the house. Ranch is growing again, means more work all around." He paused. "And I suppose I didn't like the idea of Walton treating a woman like damaged goods to be returned." Willa felt a flush of gratitude mixed with wariness. "That's very chivalrous of you, Mr. Reid, but I don't require rescue, only opportunity." His mouth quirked upward. "Fair enough. And it's Lucas, if you don't mind. Mr. Reid makes me feel like I'm in trouble with the schoolmarm." That drew a small smile from Willa. "Very well, Lucas, and you may call me Willa." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only when Lucas cleared his throat. "I'll show you to your room, then let you get settled. Supper's usually at 6, nothing fancy." He led her down the short hallway to a door on the left. The bedroom beyond was small but had a window that looked out toward the distant mountains. A narrow bed with a plain quilt stood against one wall, a chest of drawers against another. The rest of the space was indeed filled with storage: a trunk, some crates, a saddle in need of repair. "I'll clear this out tomorrow," Lucas promised, setting her trunk at the foot of the bed. "Just haven't had reason to use this room in years." "It's fine," Willa assured him. "I can manage the rest myself." Lucas lingered in the doorway as if uncertain what to do next. "Well, I'll leave you to it then. Water pumps out back if you want to freshen up." "Outhouse 2, about 50 yards behind the house. I've got work to finish before sundown." After he'd gone, Willa sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the day crashing over her in waves. This morning she'd been a mail-order bride full of nervous anticipation. Now she was, what, a housekeeper. A pretend wife. A woman adrift in a territory where she knew no one and nothing. She opened her trunk and began unpacking her few possessions: 3 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, a nightgown, a shawl, a pair of sturdy boots, and her most treasured possessions: a small collection of books, her mother's silver hairbrush, and a daguerreotype of her family taken 5 years earlier. She arranged these items carefully, bringing order to her small corner of this strange new world. By the time she'd finished and washed her face and hands at the outdoor pump, the sun was lowering toward the western mountains. The ranch looked different in the golden light, less stark, more welcoming. She could hear Lucas and Pedro talking by the corral, their voices carrying in the clear air. Willa made her way to the kitchen, determined to earn her keep from the start. The room was basic but functional, with a cast iron stove, a dry sink, shelves of provisions, and a work table. She took inventory of what was available: flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, a few potatoes sprouting eyes, onions hanging in a string bag, and some dubious-looking preserved foods in jars. By the time Lucas and Pedro came in from their work, she had managed to prepare a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and cornbread, using the supplies at hand. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling. Lucas paused in the doorway, surprise evident on his face. "You didn't have to cook tonight." "Should have given you time to settle in." "I prefer to be useful," Willa replied, setting plates on the table. though I should warn you that cooking isn't my greatest strength. I had hoped to improve under Mrs. Walton's guidance, but—" She trailed off with a small shrug. "Smells good to me," Lucas said, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. He and Pedro washed up at the basin she'd filled, then took their places at the table. The meal was consumed mostly in silence, broken only by occasional comments about the ranch work or the weather. Willa observed the two men, noting the easy familiarity between them, the respect that flowed both ways. It spoke well of Lucas that his hired hand seemed comfortable in his presence. After they'd finished eating, Pedro excused himself to check on the new calf once more before retiring to the bunkhouse. Lucas remained at the table, watching as Willa cleared the dishes. "Thank you for the meal," he said finally. "It's been a while since I've had hot food waiting at the end of the day." "You're welcome, though I hope to do better once I'm more familiar with your kitchen." Willa began washing the dishes in the basin. "I would appreciate knowing what duties you expect me to perform, so I can organize my time appropriately." Lucas leaned back in his chair. "Cooking, cleaning, mending the usual household tasks. The garden out back needs tending if you've a mind for it. Been trying to grow vegetables, but they need more attention than I can give." Willa nodded. "And what of my status? You introduced me as your wife to the station master." "That was for your protection," Lucas said carefully. "A single woman living with a bachelor would face certain difficulties in a town like Copper Creek, but within these walls you're Miss Dawson, housekeeper, nothing more unless you decide otherwise." Willa appreciated his directness. "And if people in town ask about me, let them think what they will." He rose from the table. "Town's 5 miles away. We don't go in more than once or twice a month for supplies. By then, they'll have moved on to fresher gossip." "I doubt that," Willa said dryly. "In my experience, gossip about a woman's reputation tends to linger." Lucas's expression grew serious. "Anyone gives you trouble, you tell me. I won't have you disrespected." The fierce protectiveness in his tone caught Willa by surprise. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded awkwardly, then gestured toward the bookshelf in the main room. "Feel free to use anything there. Not much for reading myself, but the previous owner left those behind." After Lucas retired to his bedroom, Willa finished cleaning the kitchen, then examined the bookshelf. Most volumes were practical guides to ranching, animal husbandry, a medical reference, but she was delighted to find a few novels among them, including a well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. She took the book to her room, lighting the small oil lamp on the bedside table. As she prepared for bed, she caught herself wondering what James Walton's house might have been like, what her life would have been as his wife. Would she have had her own bedroom there too? Or would she have been expected to fulfill all wifely duties from the start? Settling under the simple quilt, Willa tried to quiet her racing thoughts. She'd made her choice, or perhaps the choice had been made for her. Either way, the Double R was her home now, at least temporarily. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new beginnings. Her last thought before drifting off to sleep was of Lucas Reid's storm blue eyes and the unexpected kindness they'd shown a woman abandoned at a train depot. Willa woke to the sounds of a working ranch, a rooster crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, the clatter of pots in the kitchen. For a moment, she lay disoriented in the unfamiliar bed, the events of the previous day rushing back like a flood. The gray light filtering through the uncurtained window suggested early morning. Willa dressed quickly in her simplest day dress, a practical brown cotton, and pinned her chestnut hair into a serviceable bun. If she was to be a housekeeper, she would look the part. In the kitchen, she found Pedro making coffee, the rich aroma filling the small space. "Buenos dias, señorita," he greeted her with a nod. "The boss is already checking the north pasture. He says to tell you he will clear your room later today." "Thank you, Pedro." She glanced around the kitchen in the morning light, noting details she'd missed the evening before: a cracked window pane patched with paper, cupboard doors that didn't quite close, the worn spots on the wooden floor. "Is there a routine I should follow, for meals and such?" Pedro poured coffee into 3 tin cups. "Breakfast at sunrise. Lucas takes his dinner at midday when he's close to the house, otherwise he carries food with him. Supper when the work is done, usually at sunset." He handed her a cup. "I eat with the boss when I'm here, but sometimes I'm out with the cattle too." Willa sipped the strong coffee gratefully. "What should I prepare for breakfast? I don't see any eggs." "Ah, the chickens." Pedro's weathered face creased in a smile. "They lay, but you must collect. The coop is behind the garden. I will show you after coffee." The chicken coop proved to be a ramshackle structure badly in need of repair, but the 6 hens inside seemed healthy enough, if suspicious of the stranger invading their domain. Under Pedro's watchful eye, Willa gathered 8 eggs, only dropping 1 in her nervousness. "Not bad for the first time," Pedro said kindly. "The brown hen pecks. Watch your fingers with that one." By the time Lucas returned from the north pasture, Willa had managed to prepare a breakfast of fried eggs, the last of the previous night's cornbread, and more coffee. It wasn't the elaborate breakfast her mother might have made, but Lucas ate with appreciation. "There's a list on my desk of supplies we need from town," he said between bites. "If you could add whatever you need for the kitchen, I'll make the trip tomorrow." "I'd like to go with you," Willa said, surprising herself with her boldness. "I should see the town properly, and I'll need fabric and other materials if I'm to make this house more comfortable." Lucas considered her request. "Fair enough. It's a rough ride in the wagon, though. I survived the journey from Boston. I imagine I can manage 5 miles to town." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I don't doubt it." After breakfast, Lucas showed her around the ranch more thoroughly. The barn housed 4 horses besides the wagon team, along with tack and tools. A small smithy stood nearby where basic repairs could be made. The vegetable garden was indeed in a sorry state, choked with weeds and suffering from neglect. "Haven't had time to tend it properly," Lucas admitted as they surveyed the struggling plants. "But the soil's good. Previous owner's wife grew enough to feed the whole ranch crew and still had extra to sell in town." "I'll see what can be salvaged," Willa promised, already planning how to resurrect the garden. The tour ended at a small fenced graveyard on a rise behind the house, where 3 wooden crosses stood in silent witness. "The previous owners," Lucas explained quietly. "William and Sarah Davis and their son Thomas. Influenza took them all in the winter of '75. I bought the place from their daughter back east. She couldn't bear to come back after losing her family." Willa studied the simple markers, feeling a kinship with the unknown Sarah who had once made this ranch her home. It must have been difficult, dying so far from civilization. "That's the risk we all take out here," Lucas said, his gaze on the distant mountains. "The land gives and it takes away. You have to respect both aspects." Back at the house, Willa spent the day taking inventory and making lists. The pantry needed restocking, the linens were threadbare, and every room required thorough cleaning. By mid-afternoon, she had developed a plan of attack that would transform the bachelor residence into a proper home. True to his word, Lucas cleared the storage from her bedroom after the midday meal, revealing a small space that was actually quite pleasant when not crowded with saddles and crates. The window offered a view of the western mountains, and the afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the simple furnishings. "Thank you," Willa said as Lucas carried out the last of the items. "It makes a considerable difference." "It's not much of a room," he said with a shrug. "It's mine," she replied simply. That means a great deal. Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. "I suppose it would." He hesitated, then added, "I know this isn't what you came west for. I appreciate your making the best of it." "I came west for a new beginning," Willa corrected gently. "The form it takes is less important than the opportunity it represents." Lucas nodded, seeming to understand what she wasn't saying, that any life where she had some measure of control was preferable to being at the mercy of others' decisions. That evening, Willa prepared a more substantial meal using the last of the supplies in the pantry, a stew with the remaining vegetables and salt pork, and biscuits that were only slightly over-browned. As they ate, Lucas spoke more freely about the ranch, its challenges and potential. "The Double R could be profitable with the right management," he explained. "The drought set us back, but the cattle are building up again. Got about 100 head now, hoping for 20 new calves this spring." "Is that many?" Willa asked, trying to understand the scale of the operation. "It's modest. Some of the big spreads run thousands of head, but it's enough to make a living if the market holds." He broke a biscuit in half. "I'm not looking to be cattle rich, just stable." "A worthy goal," Willa agreed. "Security is no small thing." Lucas studied her over his coffee cup. "What would you have done if Walton hadn't rejected you, I mean?" The question caught her off guard. "I would have been his wife," she said after a moment. "I would have managed his household, raised his children, supported his endeavors. It's what I agreed to when I accepted his proposal by letter." "But would you have been happy?" Willa considered the question carefully. "Happiness wasn't the primary consideration. Survival was. My family couldn't support me, and my prospects in Boston were limited." "Marriage was the most practical solution." Lucas frowned slightly. "Seems a cold way to approach life." "Perhaps," Willa acknowledged. "But women have fewer options than men. We must be practical about the choices available to us." "And now, what are your options now?" Willa set down her fork. "Now I work for you until I've earned enough to establish myself elsewhere, or until—" She hesitated. "Until," Lucas prompted. "Until circumstances change," she finished carefully. The unspoken possibility hung between them that their arrangement might evolve into something more personal, more permanent. Neither seemed ready to address it directly. "Well," Lucas said finally, "you have a place here as long as you want it. No need to rush decisions." That night, Willa wrote in her journal by lamplight, recording her impressions of the Double R and its owner. Lucas Reid was not what she had expected, neither the rough, uncouth cowboy of dime novels, nor the smooth-talking charlatan she had feared when he made his unexpected offer. He was direct, reserved, and fair-minded, a man who seemed comfortable in his own skin and respectful of others. Whether she could build a life here remained to be seen, but for the first time since leaving Boston, Willa felt a tentative hope taking root. Perhaps this unexpected detour was not a misfortune after all, but rather the first step toward a future of her own making. The journey to Copper Creek the next day provided Willa with her first real look at the surrounding landscape. In the clear morning light, the desert revealed its stark beauty, rugged mountains rising in the distance, mesas standing like sentinels on the horizon, and surprising bursts of color from wildflowers and cacti blossoms dotting the scrubland. Lucas drove the wagon, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing bits of local knowledge. "That ridge there marks the northern boundary of the Double R. Creek that runs through it has water year-round, even in drought years. That's what makes this land valuable." Willa, dressed in her best remaining outfit, a slate blue traveling dress that had seen better days, listened attentively, trying to understand this land that was now her home, however temporarily. "How did you come to own the ranch?" she asked as they rattled along the rutted road. Lucas adjusted his hat against the sun. "Was a cowhand for 10 years, starting when I was 16. Worked my way up to foreman on the Circle T, saved every penny. When I heard the double R was available, I put everything I had into it." His expression turned grimmer. "Nearly lost it all in the drought, but we pulled through." "That's admirable," Willa said sincerely. "Building something from nothing." Lucas shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just stubborn, my mother would say." As they approached town, Willa felt a flutter of nervousness. "People will be curious about me." "Let them wonder," Lucas replied. "You don't owe explanations to anyone." Copper Creek looked different in the morning bustle, more vital, less foreboding than it had appeared upon her arrival. The main street was busy with wagons and riders, the businesses open and active. Lucas pulled up in front of the general store, setting the brake before coming around to help Willa down. "Reid, heard you picked up Walton's Reject." The call came from a heavy-set man lounging outside the saloon across the street. Lucas's expression hardened, but Willa laid a hand on his arm. "It's all right," she said quietly. "I'm not ashamed of being rejected by a man of such poor judgment." The corner of Lucas's mouth twitched upward. "Mrs. Reid and I have shopping to do, Barker," he called back, loud enough for others nearby to hear. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" The use of Mrs. Reid sent a jolt through Willa, though she maintained her composure as Lucas escorted her into the general store. Inside, the proprietor, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, regarded them with open curiosity. "Morning, Mr. Simmons," Lucas greeted him. "This is Willa. She's come to help at the Double R." Simmons's eyebrows rose. "Help, is it? That what they're calling it these days?" But his tone wasn't unkind, merely amused. "I'm the housekeeper," Willa clarified, deciding directness was best. "Mr. Reid was kind enough to offer employment when my previous arrangements fell through." "Housekeeper. Right." Simmons exchanged a knowing look with Lucas, who remained impassive. "Well, what can I get for you folks today?" They spent the next hour selecting supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, dried goods, seeds for the garden, fabric for curtains, and other household needs. Willa was careful with the selections, mindful that every penny spent was coming from Lucas's pocket. When Lucas stepped outside to speak with the blacksmith about a repair, Simmons leaned across the counter toward Willa. "Walton's a mean-spirited fool," he said in a low voice. "You're better off with Reid, whatever the arrangement. He's a good man, fair in his dealings." "Thank you for saying so," Willa replied carefully, "though I assure you my position is that of housekeeper." Simmons smiled knowingly. "Of course it is, and if it becomes more, well, that's between you two." He wrapped a bolt of calico in brown paper. "Town could use more decent women, married or otherwise. Too many men and not enough civilizing influence, if you ask me." When Lucas returned, they completed their purchases and loaded the supplies into the wagon. Their next stop was the dress shop, where Willa selected patterns and materials for work clothes more suitable to ranch life than her Boston dresses. The proprietress, Mrs. Abernathy, was a plump, pleasant woman who clucked sympathetically when she heard Willa's abbreviated story. "That Walton wouldn't know a quality woman if she served him tea in the parlor," she declared. "You come back any time you need a bit of female company, dear. Not many of us out here." Their final stop was the post office, where Lucas mailed a letter and Willa hesitantly inquired about sending word to her family in Boston. "They should know I'm safe, at least," she explained to Lucas, "even if they don't particularly care." "Of course," he agreed. "Use the ranch address for any reply." As they prepared to leave town, a well-dressed man approached their wagon. His expensive suit and gold watch chain marked him as someone of means, though his florid complexion suggested an overindulgence in spirits. "Reid," he greeted Lucas with a nod before turning his attention to Willa. "And this must be the young lady I've heard about. James Walton mentioned he'd had a misunderstanding with a mail-order bride." Lucas's expression darkened. "No misunderstanding, Hargrove. Just poor judgment on Walton's part." He helped Willa up to the wagon seat. "This is Willa. She's at the Double R now." Hargrove's eyes narrowed slightly. "Indeed. Well, Mrs. Reid," Lucas supplied before Willa could respond. "Mrs. Reid," Hargrove repeated, clearly disbelieving. "How?" "Fortunate for you both. I wasn't aware there had been a ceremony." "Didn't realize we needed your awareness, Hargrove," Lucas replied evenly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a long ride home." As they pulled away, Willa glanced at Lucas's profile, noting the tension in his jaw. "Who was that man?" "Franklin Hargrove. Owns the bank and has his fingers in most businesses around here. Fancies himself the most important man in the county." Lucas relaxed his grip on the reins. "He's also a business partner of Walton's. They're trying to buy up water rights along the creek that runs through my property." "Is that why you introduced me as your wife again? To make some point to him?" Lucas looked uncomfortable. "Partly, but mostly because a single woman gets treated differently out here, not always respectfully." He glanced at her. "I'm sorry if it bothers you. I can stop." Willa considered the situation. The pretense of marriage offered protection and respectability, even if it was built on a falsehood. "It's a practical solution to an awkward circumstance," she decided aloud. "I don't object as long as we're clear about the reality between ourselves." Lucas nodded, seeming relieved. "Always." The ride back to the ranch was quieter, both of them lost in their own thoughts. As they crested the rise that overlooked the Double R, Willa felt a strange sensation, not quite belonging, but perhaps the beginning of it. The cluster of buildings below, framed by the vast landscape, represented more than just shelter now. They represented possibility. Over the next 2 weeks, Willa threw herself into transforming the Double Articus main house. She scrubbed floors and walls, hung the curtains she'd sewn from the fabric purchased in town, and arranged the sparse furnishings to better advantage. The kitchen became her particular domain, organized for efficiency with the newly replenished pantry. Lucas and Pedro worked from dawn to dusk with the cattle and ranch maintenance, often returning exhausted but appreciative of the improvements they found each evening. The meals improved too, as Willa gained confidence with the cookstove and adapted her limited skills to the available ingredients. The garden presented a greater challenge. Many plants were beyond saving, but Willa cleared the weeds and prepared sections for new planting, using the seeds she'd purchased in town. Pedro, who proved to have considerable knowledge of desert growing, offered advice on what would thrive in the harsh climate. "My mother had a garden like this," he told her one evening as they worked together to build a fence that would keep rabbits out. "She grew chilies, tomatoes, beans, squash. Even in the dry years we had vegetables." "Would you show me how?" Willa asked, genuinely interested. "I grew up in a city. My knowledge of gardening comes entirely from books." Pedro smiled, pleased to be asked. "Señorita, the desert can grow many things if you understand its ways." Gradually, a routine developed. Willa rose before dawn to start breakfast, worked on household tasks in the garden during the day, and prepared supper in the evening. After the meal, while the men relaxed with coffee or mended equipment on the porch, she would often read by lamplight or work on sewing projects. Lucas remained respectful of her space and position, never pushing for more than she offered. Their conversations grew more comfortable, ranging from practical ranch matters to occasional personal revelations. She learned that he had grown up in Missouri, the son of a blacksmith, and had come west at 16 seeking adventure. He discovered that she had been educated at a girls' school until her father's business faltered, forcing her to leave at 17 to help support the family. "I worked as a seamstress," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Then, as a shop assistant. But when my youngest brother needed medicine we couldn't afford, my parents arranged the match with Mr. Walton." His advertisement specified an educated young woman of good family but modest means. Lucas frowned. "They sold you to pay for medicine," Willa sighed. "It wasn't quite so mercenary. They believed they were securing my future while easing their own burden, and I agreed to it." She smoothed her skirt. "Life offers few perfect choices, especially for women." "Still doesn't seem right," Lucas muttered. "Perhaps not, but it led me here, which has proven less catastrophic than I initially feared." She offered him a small smile. "The double R has its merits." Lucas returned her smile, the fading light softening his features. "Glad to hear it." As April turned to May, the ranch work intensified. New calves required attention, fences needed mending after winter damage, and preparations began for the summer cattle drive to the railhead in Tucson. Lucas and Pedro worked longer hours, sometimes not returning until well after dark. One evening, when Lucas hadn't appeared for supper, Willa wrapped a plate of food and carried it out to the north pasture where he'd mentioned he'd be working. She found him by lantern light, hunched over a sickly calf, his expression concentrated as he tried to coax the animal to drink from a bottle. "I brought you something to eat," she said, approaching carefully to avoid startling either man or beast. Lucas looked up, surprise evident on his tired face. "You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to take in a stranded mail-order bride," she countered, setting the plate on a nearby stump. "Yet here we are," he chuckled, the sound warm in the cool evening air. "Fair point." He nodded toward the calf. "Mother died birthing him. Been trying to keep him going, but he's not taking to the bottle well." Willa knelt beside them, studying the trembling calf. "May I try?" Lucas hesitated, then handed her the bottle of milk. "Hold it like this. Angle it so he doesn't get too much air." Their hands brushed during the exchange, a brief contact that shouldn't have been notable but somehow was. Willa focused on the calf, speaking softly as she offered the bottle. To her surprise, the animal began to suckle more enthusiastically than it had for Lucas. "Well, I'll be damned," Lucas said, watching in amazement. "He likes you better than me." "Perhaps he simply responds to a different touch," Willa suggested, careful not to disturb the feeding calf. "Animals are like people in that way." Lucas watched her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the lantern light. "You're full of surprises, Willa Dawson." "As are you, Lucas Reid." She glanced up at him. "Not many men would have offered what you did at that train depot. Not many women would have accepted." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then the calf butted against the empty bottle, breaking the spell. "He'll need feeding every few hours," Lucas said, returning to practicalities. "I was planning to bring him up to the barn tonight. I can help with the feedings," Willa offered. "It would be no trouble." Lucas studied her. "You've taken on enough already." "I like having purpose," she replied simply, "and saving this little one seems a worthy one." Together they carried the calf back to the barn, settling him in a stall with fresh straw. As they walked back to the house, the stars emerging in the vast sky above, Willa felt a contentment she hadn't expected to find in this harsh, beautiful land. The orphaned calf, whom Willa named Augustus after a character in one of her favorite novels, became her special project. She rose in the night to feed him, spent time each day coaxing him to strength, and gradually won the battle for his survival. Lucas watched her devotion with quiet approval, occasionally offering advice but mostly leaving her to develop her own approach. "You've got away with him," he remarked one afternoon as Augustus, now steadier on his legs, followed Willa around the barnyard like a pet dog. "He thinks you're his mother." "I suppose I am, in a manner of speaking," Willa replied, scratching the calf behind his ears. "We're both transplants making our way in an unfamiliar world." May brought the first harvests from the revitalized garden radishes, spring onions, and lettuce that added welcome freshness to their meals. Willa took particular pride in serving vegetables she had grown herself, especially when Lucas commented on the improvement to their usual fare. "Never thought I'd look forward to eating rabbit food," he teased as she served a salad alongside the usual beans and beef. "But this is good." "Wait until the tomatoes ripen," she promised. "Then you'll truly appreciate rabbit food." Their easy banter had become a feature of mealtimes, a comfortable exchange that felt increasingly natural. Willa found herself watching for Lucas's rare smiles, taking satisfaction in drawing them out. For his part, Lucas seemed to linger longer at the table, their conversations extending well past the end of the meal. It was during one such evening, with the windows open to catch the late spring breeze, that Lucas broached a subject they'd both been avoiding. "Town's having a Founders' Day celebration next weekend," he said, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "Dance, picnic, the usual festivities. Thought you might like to go." Willa looked up from her mending, surprised by the invitation. "As your housekeeper or your wife?" she asked directly. Lucas met her gaze steadily. "As whatever you're comfortable with, but people have settled on their own conclusions already. Might as well enjoy the benefits of their assumptions." "You mean attending a social event together without causing scandal, something like that?" He set his cup down. "You don't have to decide now. Just thought you might enjoy a day away from the ranch, meet some of the other women in the area." Willa considered the offer. She hadn't left the Double R since their shopping trip weeks ago, and the isolation, while peaceful, occasionally weighed on her. "I would like that," she decided. "Though I have nothing suitable to wear for dancing. Mrs. Abernathy at the dress shop might help with that." Lucas rose from the table. "We can stop there when we go in." The prospect of the social event occupied Willa's thoughts over the next few days. What did it mean that Lucas wanted to present her publicly as his wife? Was it merely practical, as he suggested, or was there something more behind the invitation? Her opportunity to visit the dress shop came sooner than expected. 3 days later, a rider from the neighboring ranch brought word that Lucas was needed to help with a cattle rustling situation in the eastern foothills. He would be gone for at least 2 days. "Pedro will stay at the ranch," Lucas told her as he packed saddlebags for the journey. "I don't like leaving you alone, but this can't be helped. These rustlers have hit 3 ranches already." "We'll manage," Willa assured him, though she felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of his absence. "Be careful." Lucas paused in his preparations, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I will." He hesitated, then added, "When I get back, we should talk about arrangements for the future." Willa's heart quickened. "What sort of arrangements? More permanent ones, maybe?" His voice was gruff, his attention suddenly very focused on tightening the straps of his saddlebag. "If you're amenable." Before Willa could respond, Pedro appeared at the door to announce that the other ranchers were approaching. The moment for clarity passed, leaving Willa with more questions than answers as she watched Lucas ride away with the group of grim-faced men. The following day, Pedro offered to drive Willa into town for supplies and to visit the dress shop, a suggestion she readily accepted. The chance to prepare for the Founders' Day celebration, and perhaps for a more significant conversation with Lucas upon his return, was too important to miss. Mrs. Abernathy welcomed Willa warmly to the dress shop, ushering her into the back room where several ready-made dresses awaited alteration. "I've been hoping you'd come by," she said, displaying a blue silk gown with modest lace trim. "This just came in from Tucson, would suit your coloring beautifully." Willa touched the fine fabric wistfully. "It's lovely, but I'm afraid it's beyond my means." "Nonsense," Mrs. Abernathy declared. "Lucas Reid can well afford to dress his wife properly for Founder's Day. Everyone will be in their finest." "I'm not actually," Willa began, then stopped. What was she exactly? Not Lucas's wife in truth, but something more than a mere employee after these weeks of shared meals and conversations, of working side by side to build something on the double R. Mrs. Abernathy misinterpreted her hesitation. "My dear, no one cares about the technicalities out here. Half the marriages in the territory started without benefit of clergy. What matters is the commitment between two people." She lowered her voice. "And from what I hear, Reed's never shown interest in any woman before you arrived. That speaks volumes." Willa allowed herself to be persuaded to try on the dress, which fit as if made for her with only minor adjustments needed to the hem and waist. The reflection in Mrs. Abernathy's mirror showed a transformed woman, not the abandoned mail-order bride in travel-worn clothes, but a composed, elegant figure who looked as if she belonged in this frontier town. "Lucas won't be able to take his eyes off you," Mrs. Abernathy predicted as she pinned the hem. "It's not like that between us," Willa protested weakly. The older woman smiled knowingly. "Not yet, perhaps, but I've been watching men and women find each other for 40 years, my dear. There's something there, whether you've acknowledged it or not." Willa couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach when she thought of Lucas seeing her in the blue silk, or of his cryptic words about more permanent arrangements. Was it possible that what had begun as a pragmatic solution for both of them had evolved into something more meaningful? On the ride back to the ranch, with the dress carefully boxed and stowed in the wagon, Willa found herself looking at the double R with new eyes. The modest house with its newly curtained windows, the garden beginning to flourish, the corrals and outbuildings, all of it had become familiar, even dear to her over the past weeks. Could it truly become her home, not just her workplace? Lucas returned late the following day, dusty and weary but unharmed. The rustlers had been caught and turned over to the territorial marshal. He reported over the supper Willa had kept warm for him. 3 men from up north thought they could make easy money stealing cattle from isolated ranches, he explained between bites of stew. "Won't be trying that again anytime soon." "I'm glad you're safe," Willa said sincerely. "Was anyone hurt?" "Jim Colton took a bullet in the arm, but the doctor says he'll mend." Lucas's expression softened as he looked at her across the table. "The house feels different when you're here. Better." The simple statement warmed Willa more than any flowery compliment could have. "I went to town with Pedro yesterday," she told him, changing the subject to hide her flustered reaction. "Mrs. Abernathy helped me find a dress for the Founder's Day celebration." Lucas smiled. "Good, I want you to enjoy yourself." He set down his fork. "Willa, about what I said before I left." A crash from the barn interrupted him, followed by Pedro's shout. Lucas was on his feet immediately, grabbing his hat and striding toward the door. "Stay here," he ordered. "Could be those rustlers' friends come looking for revenge." Willa's heart pounded as she watched through the window. Lucas and Pedro converged on the barn, rifles ready, their tense postures suggesting real danger. After what seemed an eternity but was probably only minutes, they relaxed. Lucas returned to the house, his expression relieved but annoyed. Just a raccoon that got into the feed storage, he explained. Knocked over a stack of crates trying to escape. The interruption had broken the moment, and Lucas didn't return to the subject of arrangements that evening. Willa went to bed with a mixture of disappointment and anticipation, wondering what Founder's Day might bring. The celebration fell on a perfect late May Saturday, with clear skies and mild temperatures. Willa spent extra time on her appearance, arranging her hair in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun, and donning the blue silk dress that Mrs. Abernathy had finished altering just in time. When she emerged from her bedroom, Lucas was waiting in the main room, dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit that, while not new, was well maintained, a crisp white shirt, and a string tie. He'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair, transforming from rugged rancher to quite a handsome figure. His expression when he saw her made all the effort worthwhile. "You look," he began, then seemed to lose his words. "That is, the dress is." "Thank you," Willa said, saving him from his struggle. "You look very nice as well." The drive to town was filled with anticipation. Copper Creek had been transformed for the celebration, with bunting decorating the main street, tables set up for the picnic, and a wooden platform constructed for dancing. Already, the town was filling with ranchers and their families from the surrounding areas, all in their finest clothes. As Lucas helped Willa down from the wagon, she was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Mrs. Abernathy hurried over to greet them, beaming with approval at Willa's appearance. "The dress is perfect," she declared. "Come, let me introduce you to some of the other women. Lucas, you don't mind if I steal your wife for a bit, do you?" Lucas smiled at Willa. "Not at all, as long as she's returned safely for the dancing later." The afternoon passed in a whirl of introductions and conversations. Willa met the wives of neighboring ranchers, the schoolteacher, the preacher's wife, and various other women who formed the small but resilient female population of the area. Most were welcoming, curious about the woman Lucas Reid had brought to the Double R. "We'd all but given up on Lucas ever settling down," confided Mrs. Colton, wife of the rancher who'd been wounded in the Rustler incident. "Too married to that ranch of his, we thought. Then you came along and surprised us all." "It wasn't quite so deliberate," Willa demurred, uncomfortable with the deception yet unwilling to correct the assumption. "However it happened, it's good to see him with someone," Mrs. Colton continued. "The Double Articus, a fine property, just needs a woman's touch to make it proper." Throughout the day, Willa noticed Lucas watching her from across the gathering, his expression thoughtful. He participated in the men's activities, a shooting contest, horseshoe pitching, discussions of cattle prices and water rights, but his attention repeatedly returned to her. As the afternoon waned, musicians set up on the platform and began tuning their instruments. Tables were cleared away to create space for dancing, and lanterns were lit against the approaching dusk. Lucas appeared at Willa's side as the first dance was announced. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Reid?" he asked formally, offering his hand. Willa placed her hand in his, acutely aware of the calluses that spoke of hard work and the gentleness with which he held her fingers. "You may, Mr. Reid." He led her onto the dance floor, one hand at her waist as they joined the other couples. "I should warn you that I'm not much of a dancer," he murmured as the music began. "Fortunately, neither am I," Willa replied with a small smile. "We can be unaccomplished together." Despite his warning, Lucas moved with surprising grace for a man who spent his days on horseback. They found their rhythm quickly, turning among the other dancers as the fiddle and guitar played a lively tune. "You're enjoying yourself?" Lucas asked as they circled the floor. "Very much," Willa answered truthfully. "It's been a pleasant day. Good." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. I've been thinking about what to say to you, how to approach this, but I'm not a man of fancy words. Willa's pulse quickened. I've never required fancy words, only honest ones. The music slowed, and Lucas drew her slightly closer. Then, honestly, Willa, I'd like you to stay. Not as my housekeeper, but as my wife. For real, not just for appearances. Even though she had anticipated something of the sort, the directness of his proposal took her breath away. Lucas, we've known each other barely 2 months. Long enough for me to know my own mind, he replied steadily. I respect you, Willa. I enjoy your company. The double R is a better place with you in it. He paused. And I believe I could make you happy if you gave me the chance to try. The music ended, but they remained on the dance floor, other couples moving around them toward the refreshment tables. This isn't how I imagined my life unfolding, Willa said softly. Nor I, Lucas admitted. But sometimes the unexpected turns out to be exactly what we needed. He released her as propriety demanded now that the music had stopped, but his eyes held hers. You don't have to answer now. Take time to think about it. Before Willa could respond, a commotion near the edge of the gathering drew their attention. James Walton, her original intended husband, was making his way through the crowd, his face flushed with anger or drink or both. There she is, he shouted, pointing at Willa. The woman who was supposed to be my wife, taken in by Reid before she even had the decency to leave town. Lucas stepped protectively in front of Willa, his posture tense. You rejected her, Walton, left her stranded at the depot. Whatever happened after that is no concern of yours. Walton lurched forward, his expensive suit rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. I had second thoughts, came back for her the next day, but she was already gone, shacked up with you. A murmur ran through the crowd. Willa felt a surge of indignation, both at Walton's crude implication and at the idea that she was something to be claimed and discarded at a man's whim. Mr. Walton, she said clearly, stepping beside Lucas rather than remaining in his shadow, you made your decision when you sent that letter rejecting me without so much as a conversation. You have no claim on me now. I paid for your passage west, Walton retorted. That counts for something. It counts for a ticket you purchased, nothing more, Willa replied coolly. Not ownership, not obligation, certainly not affection. Several of the townspeople nodded in agreement, and Willa saw Mrs. Abernathy and Mrs. Colton exchange approving glances. Walton, sensing the crowd's mood turning against him, changed tactics. What about you, Reid? Taking another man's intended bride, that the kind of honor you operate by, Lucas remained calm. I offered Miss Dawson employment when she needed it. Anything beyond that has been her choice entirely. He glanced at Willa, something softening in his expression. I'd never presumed to own her or control her decisions. The contrast between the two men could not have been starker. Walton disheveled and aggressive, Lucas steady and respectful. Whatever doubts Willa might have harbored about Lucas's proposal evaporated in that moment of clarity. Mr. Walton, she said firmly, I am exactly where I choose to be, with exactly whom I choose to be with. Your opportunity passed when you decided I wasn't suitable without bothering to know me. Please excuse us. She turned to Lucas, who was watching her with undisguised admiration. I believe you promised me another dance, Mr. Reid. Lucas offered his arm with a smile that reached his eyes. So I did, Mrs. Reid. As he led her back to the dance floor, leaving Walton sputtering behind them, Willa leaned close to murmur, Yes. Yes, Lucas repeated, his hand finding her waist as the music began again. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll be your wife, your actual wife. She met his gaze steadily. Not because I need protection or security, though I appreciate both, but because I've come to care for you, Lucas Reid, more than I expected to. The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual, then suddenly brilliant. "I've been half in love with you since you stood on that depot platform with your chin held high, refusing to be broken by Walton's rejection." "Only half," Willa teased, feeling suddenly light. "The other half caught up quickly," he assured her, his hand tightening on hers as they moved to the music. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dancing and conversation, with frequent interruptions from well-wishers who had witnessed the confrontation with Walton. By the time they left the celebration, word had spread throughout the gathering that Lucas and Willa would be making their arrangement official with a proper ceremony soon. The ride back to the Double R was filled with a new awareness, a shift in their relationship that was both momentous and somehow inevitable. When they reached the ranch, Lucas helped Willa down from the wagon, but didn't immediately release her hands. "I meant what I said," he told her in the silver moonlight. "I want you to stay because you want to, not because you feel obligated or trapped." "I know," Willa replied softly. "That's why I said yes." He hesitated, then bent slowly, giving her ample time to step away if she chose. When she didn't, he brushed his lips against hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Willa responded, her hands coming to rest on his shoulders as the kiss deepened, becoming an answer and a promise all at once. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "We should wait to do that again until after the preacher makes it official," he said with reluctant propriety. "Wouldn't want to give the gossips more fuel." Willa laughed softly. "A bit late for that, I think. But yes, we'll observe the proprieties. For now." The wedding took place 2 weeks later in the small church in Copper Creek. It was a simple ceremony, attended by the handful of people they'd come to count as friends: Pedro, Mrs. Abernathy, the Coltons, and several neighboring ranchers and their wives. Willa wore her blue silk dress again, now adorned with a sprig of wildflowers Mrs. Colton had helped her gather that morning. As they spoke their vows, Willa reflected on the strange path that had led her to this moment. The mail-order bride arrangement that had failed, the unexpected offer at the train depot, the gradual building of trust and affection over shared meals and daily work. None of it had been planned, yet all of it had been necessary to bring her here, to this man who looked at her with such open devotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." Lucas's kiss was gentle, but held the promise of passion to come, a fitting beginning to their life together. As they turned to face their small gathering of well-wishers, Willa caught sight of James Walton standing at the back of the church, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met briefly before he turned and walked out, closing the door quietly behind him. "Everything all right?" Lucas asked, noting her momentary distraction. Willa smiled up at him, secure in her choice. "Everything is perfect." The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with a meal at the town's small hotel and many toasts to the couple's happiness. As the afternoon waned, Lucas and Willa made their farewells and began the journey back to the Double R, their home, now truly shared. Pedro had tactfully arranged to stay in town overnight, giving the newlyweds privacy for their first evening as husband and wife. The house welcomed them with familiar comfort, yet everything felt new, charged with possibility. That night, as moonlight filtered through the curtains Willa had sewn, husband and wife discovered each other fully for the first time. Their coming together was tender and passionate by turns, a physical expression of the bond that had grown between them over the past months. Afterward, as Willa lay in the circle of Lucas's arms, she thought about the twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. "I should thank James Walton," she murmured drowsily. "If he hadn't rejected me, I never would have found you." Lucas tightened his embrace. "His loss, my gain," he said simply, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I'd like to think we might have found each other somehow, even if circumstances had been different." "Perhaps," Willa agreed, liking the notion that they were somehow meant to meet. "But I'm rather fond of our story as it is abandoned at the depot, rescued by a cowboy with a proposal." "Not rescued," Lucas corrected gently. "Offered an opportunity that you were brave enough to accept. There's a difference." Willa smiled in the darkness, appreciating his understanding of what mattered to her. "Yes, there is." As summer ripened into fall, the Double R prospered under their joint stewardship. The garden produced abundantly, the cattle thrived, and the house truly became a home, filled with small comforts and personal touches that reflected both its occupants. Willa discovered unexpected satisfaction in ranch life, the rhythm of seasons, the direct connection between work and results, the small daily victories of a well-managed household and productive land. Lucas found new joy in sharing the achievements and challenges with a partner who understood both his practical concerns and his deeper attachment to the ranch. Their marriage deepened with each passing month, built on mutual respect, shared labor, and growing affection. The physical aspect of their relationship, initially hesitant, blossomed into a source of intimacy and pleasure for both. In November, as the first chill of winter touched the air, Willa confirmed what she had begun to suspect: she was expecting a child in the late spring. Lucas's reaction to the news was everything she could have hoped for, his usual reserve giving way to unrestrained joy as he lifted her in a careful embrace. "A family," he said wonderingly, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our family." "Yes," Willa agreed, covering his hand with her own. "Though it already feels like we're a family, you and I." Lucas smiled, the expression now familiar and dear to her. "We are. This little one will just make it more complete." As they prepared for their first Christmas on the Double R, Willa sometimes marveled at how thoroughly her life had changed in less than a year. From reluctant mail-order bride to abandoned traveler to ranch wife and expectant mother, each transformation had brought her closer to the contentment she now felt. On Christmas Eve, with a small pine tree cut from the foothills decorated in the corner, and the scent of gingerbread filling the kitchen, Lucas presented her with a gift: a rocking chair he had secretly commissioned from the carpenter in town. "For when the baby comes," he explained as she ran her hands over the smooth wood, "and for now when you want to rest by the fire." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Willa gave him her own gift, a framed portrait she had arranged during their last trip to town, showing the two of them standing before the Double R house, her hand resting on his arm, both smiling into the camera. "Our first family portrait," she said. "Though not our last, I hope." Lucas placed the frame carefully on the mantel, then drew her into his arms. "I never expected this," he admitted quietly. "When I rode to town that day and saw you standing alone at the depot, I was just thinking to offer temporary help to someone in need. I never imagined that you'd end up with a wife, a child on the way, and curtains on your windows," Willa teased gently. "That I'd find everything I didn't know I was missing," he corrected, his voice husky with emotion. "You've made the Double R more than a ranch, Willa. You've made it a home." Willa leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him, the security of being exactly where she belonged. "And you've given me what I truly came west seeking: not just survival, but a place to belong, a place to build a life worth living." Outside, a light snow began to fall, dusting the Double R with white that would glitter in the morning sun. Inside, by the warm fireplace, Willa Reid sat in her new rocking chair, her husband at her feet, his hand resting protectively over the new life growing within her. This was not the future she had envisioned when she boarded the train in Boston, answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride. It was something far better, a love born not of desperation or convenience, but of mutual respect and genuine affection. A partnership forged in the challenging beauty of the Arizona territory, as enduring as the mountains that watched over their ranch. As Willa drifted to sleep that night in the circle of Lucas's arms, she said a silent thank you to James Walton for rejecting her, to Lucas for offering an alternative, and to herself for having the courage to step into the unknown. Sometimes, she reflected drowsily, the best journeys were the ones you never planned to take. Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers across the rangeland, painting the usually brown landscape in purples, yellows, and reds. The double Artichokes garden flourished under Willa's expanded efforts, now aided by a local girl who came 3 times a week to help with heavier tasks as Willa's pregnancy advanced. In late May, after a day and night of labor attended by Mrs. Colton, who had experience as a midwife, Willa gave birth to a healthy daughter with Lucas's copper hair and her own determined chin. They named her Sarah Elizabeth Reid, after Lucas's mother and Willa's grandmother. Lucas, who had paced the porch throughout the ordeal, entered the bedroom with awe and trepidation when Mrs. Colton finally invited him in. The sight of his wife, exhausted but radiant, holding their tiny daughter, brought the stoic rancher to tears. "She's perfect," he whispered, carefully touching the baby's small hand. "Like her mother." Willa smiled tiredly. "She has your hair, poor thing." "And your spirit, I'll wager," Lucas replied, perching carefully on the edge of the bed. "Thank you, Willa, for everything." As Sarah grew from infant to toddler, the double R continued to prosper. Lucas hired 2 more hands to help with the expanding herd, and Pedro, now promoted to foreman, took on the responsibility of training them. Willa managed the household with efficient grace, balancing motherhood with her duties as the rancher's wife. James Walton left Copper Creek that autumn, having sold his business interests to Franklin Hargrove and departed for California. Willa felt no regret at the news, only a distant acknowledgement that his rejection had ultimately led to her happiness. On the day of Sarah's first birthday, as family and friends gathered at the Double R to celebrate, Willa found a moment of quiet reflection on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky. Lucas joined her, slipping an arm around her waist as they stood in comfortable silence. "Penny for your thoughts," he said eventually. Willa leaned into his embrace. "I was thinking about that day at the train depot, how close I came to boarding the eastbound train the next morning, how different our lives would be if I had." "I'd have come after you," Lucas said with quiet certainty. "Maybe not that day, but eventually. Once I met you, I don't think I could have just let you go." Willa turned in his arms to face him. "You never told me that." Lucas shrugged slightly, a gesture she had come to recognize as embarrassment. "Never seemed the right time to admit I was smitten from the start. Didn't want you thinking I'd taken advantage." "Lucas Reid," Willa said with fond exasperation, "after all this time, do you still not realize that I fell in love with you just as quickly? That by the time you proposed at Founder's Day, I was already hoping you would." His smile was slow and sweet. "I hoped, but I wasn't certain." "You're not always easy to read, Mrs. Reid." "Then let me be perfectly clear now," Willa said, rising on tiptoes to kiss him softly. "I love you, I'm grateful for every day we have together, and I have never once regretted saying yes to your proposal, either of them." Inside the house, Sarah's laughter mingled with the conversation and music of their celebration. Outside, the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the Arizona sky. And on the porch of the home they had built together, Lucas and Wilhelmina Reid shared a kiss that held the memory of their unexpected beginning and the promise of their future. Together, a love story that had started with rejection and found its way to joy.